Good morning, distinguished partners, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. So we're ready to continue the Capacity Building Hub today. We already had a very nice, engaging session of the Capacity Building Academy with our colleagues and partners from UNU. So as the ongoing Capacity Building Hub continues to cover crucial thematic areas in capacity building today, the Hub shifts its attention to capacity building for climate finance. That has been the PCCB's focus area for this year and will continue to be the focus area for next year, actually. So basically, just to give you a bit of a background, since COP21, the PCCB, the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, annually decides on a focus area or theme under which to frame all of activities in order to improve technical exchange and knowledge on capacity building. This year, the focus area or theme is capacity building for holistic investment strategies, bankable projects, and stakeholder engagement to strengthen the implementation of NDCs and NABs in developing countries. A long name, but in essence, it's about capacity building for accessing and mobilizing climate finance. So in that sense, the PCC every year, including this year's, is very pleased to organize a focus area day that speaks to some of the challenges developing countries face, in this case, when it comes to building their capacities to access climate finance and how to mobilize climate finance from different sources. And today we will explore actually this issue based on good practices in governance, policy, integration, and institutional strengthening through the experiences of very important institutions like the Green Climate Fund, the Global Capacity Building Coalition, and Climate Compatible Growth. So it's going to be a very simple session. So we have very good experts, and we have them here with us, and have a series of questions that will go into further delve into what are the main issues regarding capacity building for accessing finance. So special thanks to all organizations taking part in today's events and all participants for being here. We really appreciate it. This room is a bit hidden and it takes a lot of walking, but thank you for all being here. And I now have the great pleasure to invite our distinguished panelists to the stage to join us for what I'm sure will be a very interesting conversation. And again, this is a capacity building hub, so I hope all participants will take home some insights, knowledge, and hopefully some aha moments. So allow me to please welcome Dr. Ashala Abeyen-Singh, Director of Investment Services from the Green Climate Fund, Mr. Lucas Isakowicz, Head of Capacity Building, Global Capacity Building Coalition, and Mark Howells, Director of Climate Compatible Growth. Please join us in the stage. Let's give them a round of applause. Okay, again, thank you very much for being here with us. Again, like I said, the format is quite simple, quite straightforward. It's a conversation with renowned experts on the field of finance and capacity building. So we have three sets of questions I will be asking each of you to get different perspectives, different views on each question, which are, in essence, first related to the type of capacity building interventions that you've seen are needed to mobilize and access climate finance. What, in your experience, can be the practical steps countries can take to improve the institutional frameworks and coordination mechanisms, and what are your institutions, or how partnerships between global and regional local institutions can help these endeavors. So that's an overview of what we'll be discussing here. So let me start then with the first question. So what are the most critical capacity building interventions that are needed at institutional and systemic levels to enhance access to and mobilize climate finance? How can this be scaled or replicated across different governance levels? So here we're talking about these, what is needed at more at the institutional level and systemic levels. Of course, capacity building is an effort that targets mostly individuals, but we're seeing that having those institutional capacities is always very important. So can I start with, let's start to my left with Mark, please. And please, you want to introduce yourself and your organization, please go ahead.
No, sure. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's a privilege to be with such an amazing group. My name is Mark Howells. I'm an academic from Imperial College and Loughborough University. I run something called the Climate Compatible Growth Program. This is a £95 million program from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK government that goes out until 2030, and we're very interested in creating public goods and infrastructure that people can build on and allows us to go at scale. So we were talking about capacity building and you know how to do this sensibly. If I may, I'm going to tell a very quick story and then translate that back into how we think capacity building should be done well. So we've created a process together with a number of organizations, some 40 international organizations, called Data to Deal. This goes through the steps from government planning all the way from data collection through to developing plans through to translating those into investable strategies. It's mobilized over $10 billion in 3 small countries in Latin America, and we've taken a bit of time to step back and to think about how we can set up modular structures that allow this to scale at pace. So the little story is, you know, we have many countries coming to the COP at the moment, and you know, many of them in their NDCs will have a lot of projects. They don't know how much finance they can get for those projects, so they're speculative. Because they're speculative, they don't have the high-level political buy-in that's required to have a whole-of-government approach to go through this. So imagine a country comes up and it says, okay, we want to invest in hydropower, we want to invest in solar, and we're going to move people to buses, and we're going to decarbonize the bus fleet by using electric buses. Now that sounds great, and it's compelling on a number of levels, but because there's not the high-level political buy-in, it may be that that analysis has been done independent of Energy Ministry analysis. You could look at that and say, well, that's great, but you've said nothing in here about how we're going to make sure those energy supplies are secure. How are you going to integrate those renewables? How are you going to strengthen the grid and set it up? And how are you going to put the charging stations in place? The Transport Ministry might have similar concerns about the moving to buses and the organization of the bus fleet. So if you're an international investor or funder, immediately you have a red flag. There are 2 ministries that are talking, that don't agree with each other at a development level. Then you go to the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Finance looks at this and it says, okay, but we get 20% of our revenue from taxing vehicles or taxing the use of gasoline, and you're trying to get everybody away from gasoline to use electricity. This doesn't fit with our revenue model, our fiscal model going into the future. Another massive red flag for funders. And then you get to the funders and they look at what's there, and the only thing that they can see themselves in is maybe the hydropower plant investment, because that's been done in the past, and this country ends up mobilizing all of its soft concessionary finance that should be used somewhere else, just crowding that into the hydropower investment. So what we do is, with this data to deal process, we do it differently. We have some tools where we help the country understand exactly how much money it can mobilize from what funds for these kinds of investments. So you can click on a country, it'll tell you, we think you have about $15 billion worth of concessionary finance that you can mobilize, that you can use to crowd in private finance. With that, we get the high-level political commitment that allows us to go across different ministries and have a mandate for a start, and then do the technical work. So then we work together to create a consolidated vision and do some modeling and so on. And we'll go with the Energy Ministry and help them figure out how to do the power purchase agreements, the grid integration, and the charger things. We'll work with the Transport Ministry to think about how we can set up fleet ownership models. And then we'll work with the Finance Ministry to help them see that, okay, yes, you lose tax revenue here, but you're going to be importing a lot less gasoline. That means there's a lot more money circulating within the economy, so we can think about how to change that the fiscal base for the tax collection and so on. And this does great things for the debt situation of the country and otherwise. And then we work with the financiers. We have this special tool that we've developed that helps take a long-term scenario, translate it into a set of projects. We look at a simple project finance wrapper around each one of those projects, and we can now look at the projects and map them to the available finance. And so we can get the concessionary finance to the things that are often difficult to finance, maybe some of the grid investments and charges. We can set up other things as well. And at the end of the day, what happens is you have a government with a larger portfolio of projects that are, they fit with the development objectives of the different ministries. They're fiscally feasible, so they fit with the finance ministry who holds the keys to the finance, and then they're financially viable as well, because we could put business models around the solar power, around the transmission, around the chargers, as well as a bus fleet ownership model, and so on. So this creates a larger set of projects, and a larger amount of finance mobilized, and then we leverage the finance. So the best finance goes, the softest finance goes to where it's needed the most, and the other finance just goes to leverage more private participation and so on in the system. Now, to go into the capacity building, there are a couple of things that we need to do. One is understand exactly which ministries are involved in which steps along the process to create this whole of government cost-benefit analysis that the finance ministry can sign off on and go into negotiations with the various funds that are out there. So we've identified exactly what needs to happen where, and there's always a mapping. Every country is unique and it's got its own political economy, but number one is to find out what's needed, quite frankly, to do that GCF application, to do the GFANS engagement, to do the other engagement. And we can, and then we can, because we've got the high-level political buy-in, we can set up the workflow there. It's the case, and very important, that this capacity building is done while hand-holding government through the steps needed to go and do that finance application. All right? At some point, government has to do the finance application, but you can do a lot of the work together to a point where they're happy to take the lead. So there's we identify what institutional capacity building is needed where. Now, anybody who's any good in government and gets trained up often finds themselves moving to different places. That might be into a president's office, into a different ministry, or into different places and spaces. So you also have to work at building capacity in universities and so on, so that you can sustain this. So we have a special program we've set up with universities, kind of like an MBA, but it's around finance mobilization. It can live in different bits of universities, but given that you're looking at billions, at least billions of dollars of finance flow per country, the latent demand here is really quite large. We're lucky. Our university consortium consists of UCL, Imperial, Oxford, Cambridge, and others too. So we find the convening power quite strong. It's relatively easy when we start this off then to go to a university and find champions and there are lots of champions. There are dedicated patriotic champions who can leverage those sorts of relationships really well. In the background, we create all of the public good infrastructure that's needed for this. We have regional training courses. We train about 1,000 people a year face-to-face. And our online offering with the Open University has been downloaded about 500,000 times. We're focusing right now on some of the new tools in the finance offering, and working with GCBC and hopefully with others as well, just to make sure that those are fit for purpose. So when a country engages, they know that they're doing enough to be able to go and apply to a set of funds and not make it too fund specific. And hopefully at the end of the day, then that creates agency in country. Once you've done this once, then maybe you pick up some relatively soft concessionary finance. We just worked with the Dominican Republic, who got $85 million from the climate investment funds. Now that's a first step. That provides a huge amount of money and incentive for you to go around the houses again and to set up more and stronger institutional capacity to mobilize more from other funds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think it's very encouraging to see that there's a lot of tools available, like the ones you developed. And I find it very interesting you say that first you need to understand where the money is at the countries and where are gaps that could be filled by different instruments. So I think it's looking at, as you say, from a holistic perspective and not just project development for a specific fund. So I think that's very, very interesting. Now let's hear from a multilateral fund directly. Maybe, Achala, again, the question is, what are the most critical capacity building interventions needed at institutional and systemic levels to enhance access to and mobilize climate finance? Please.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Mark said, there are some good tools available for countries to utilize in building their own capacity. And I'm going to say, in this COP, we are hearing quite a lot about lack of finance, which is true. Well, when you think about the trillions needed for climate action in our countries, there is a gap in terms of what's available and what's needed. But what I'm going to say is that actually for capacity building, there is a good amount of finance also available, in addition to the tools that Mark is talking about. And one such funding pot is the GCF Readiness funding pot. We are the largest capacity building technical assistant funding pot when it comes to climate change in the world. $1.2 billion from the GCF's operationalization to 2027. Each country has up to $7 million for this 4-year period from 2024 to 2027 to be utilized for national coordination, for project preparation, for pipeline development, for knowledge, for peer-to-peer learning, etc. And what I think we need to do more is to strengthen country ownership, to really utilize the available funding to utilize them much more strategically. Right now, what we are seeing from the readiness funding utilization is it's very siloed. It's just one ministry or one agency or one person actually in the government deciding how they are going to use the GCF readiness funding. This funding can be utilized much more strategically to say, here are the needs, here are the gaps, here is how we would like the partners to work with us. So just completely address the siloed approach and say, entity X or organization Y, please don't do your siloed project with us. Here are our priorities. Here's how we would like the priorities to be addressed, and you should focus on this sector. The other one focuses on the other sector. This kind of strategic utilization, I'm not seeing enough. I'm the director of the Department of Investment Services at GCF, and in my department, we manage the readiness funding pot. We also lead the accreditation to GCF and also project preparation facility. And I've been with the GCF only for 1 year, and this is what I've seen within the 1 year that I've been with the GCF. And the second part is iterative learning. What is it that we can learn from the previous readiness program? What can we now do to improve it iteratively? I'm not saying it's still very, very, very siloed. We have committed $19 billion since GCF operationalization from 2015 to now. And what we are receiving is still very siloed projects rather than projects or programs emanating from a strategic, coordinated approach from the countries. We are trying to address this. One way that we have now proposed to do is through much more strategic country coordination mechanisms, including country platforms. You may have heard, not yesterday, Saturday, we launched the country platforms from 16 countries utilizing readiness funding. So Brazil, Caribbean regional platform, they've already been announced, and 14 other countries came in and said, we would like to utilize this readiness funding now to bring all investors on board in a much more strategic manner, to do holistic coordination, whole government, whole society, ministries of finance involved, ministries of trade, other online ministries are involved. And that, I think, I'm not saying let's reinvent the wheel. There are so many national coordination mechanisms at country level. So let's not reinvent the wheel, but use the GCF readiness funding to build the capacities in a whole government manner, so that it's not just one person leading this work. We have also agreed to allocate funding for each small island developing state and the LDC to have a GCF liaison officer, so they can work with the GCF in terms of getting through our procedures. We have also revised our accreditation framework now, really to focus on national entities and regional entities to be accredited, so they take the ownership and work with international entities hand in hand, but to really be in the driving seat. So GCF is changing, and we are listening to countries in terms of what the countries would like to have. But in terms of broader access to climate finance, please use the GCF readiness funding much more strategically so the country can be in the driving seat. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You touch upon something that we hear a lot from parties in the negotiation process, which is country ownership. So I think it's very important what you mentioned, and this is something that it was sort of the second question, but you covered this already. Thank you very much, Chala. So over to Lucas. So again, what are the most critical capacity building interventions needed at the institutional and systemic levels to enhance access to and mobilize climate finance?
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having us on this panel. It's really an honor to be here alongside GCF and CCG, two great partners. My name is Lucas Desagüez. I'm the head of capacity building for the Global Capacity Building Coalition. When I was coming to COP, my niece, who's 7 years old, asked me, she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm the head of capacity building." She said, "What is capacity building?" And first I tried to explain it the way that we explain it maybe on these panels, and obviously she's 7 years old, and she got bored very quickly, and she asked the question again. And so then I tried to repeat, and I said, it's having the right people in the right place with the right resources to execute on climate change and make things better. And that seemed right. And before I get into our theory a little bit, I just want to applaud the GCF and Climate Compatible Growth, two organizations that I think are making capacity building accessible, easy, with finance, with the right sort of tools. This is exactly what we need right now in this moment. In this moment where ODA is shrinking, where the amount of finance that's going into climate change is tightening, and obviously we know how much finance is critical to achieving the NDC objectives, we need to be able to do more with less. And this is the role of the Global Capacity Building Coalition in some sense. We were launched 2 years ago at COP28, where our founding principles are to help coordinate and align along the different capacity building organizations and structures that exist to make sure that there's harmony across the ecosystem, that we're elevating the right sort of partners that are doing really good capacity building work, that we're helping these initiatives scale. And in this work, we've actually just released a thought paper right now at COP30, which is trying to outline some of the core principles of good or effective capacity building, I should say. And I'm going to echo some of the things that my colleagues here have already mentioned, but in this paper, we interviewed practitioners across the space, so the UN agencies, the likes of DFIs, and partners on the ground that are actually the ones that are either implementing or receiving capacity building training. And the core lessons that we received, and that you can read more details of in our thought paper, are that one, capacity building really needs to be demand-driven, of course, and two, that it needs to be co-designed with local partners wherever possible. Previous to working at the Global Capacity Building Coalition, I was a senior advisor for USAID, working on climate finance with a global portfolio, and it was very clear from that perch, the projects that were effective were the ones that had deep coordination with local partners. So I'll give a small example here. We had the privilege of working in Pakistan, working with the Ministry of Climate Change on a carbon market framework. And in that work, as soon as we got involved, we realized there were 3 or 4 other international partners. So there were USAID, there was the World Bank, there was UNDP, there was GGGI. And all of us got to the table, and all of us had our own ideas around what was the right framework for Pakistan and coordinating with the Ministry of Climate Change. And initially the work was incredibly messy and I would say ineffective. But after time, the international partners aligned, we built a coordination mechanism, we teamed up with the Ministry of Climate Change, understood their needs, and then actually we did a roadshow where we met with regional governments and local project implementers to understand what was the real need and who were the local partners that could actually help carry this work out. And I think this lesson around demand-driven and co-design with local partners is absolutely critical when we're thinking about designing things that are right people, right place, right resources.
Thank you so much, Lucas. I think it's related to what Mark, you already mentioned, for example, engaging local institutions like universities or maybe research organizations. That's something we heard also a lot in terms of. So we have in our process, from what we hear from countries, is the issue of country ownership, the issue of retaining capacities. Building is important, but retaining is also fundamental. Sustain capacities, retain and sustain capacities. And also the issue of making sure those capacity building interventions are aligned with country priorities. So taking all of this into account, and I'm changing a bit the questions because you already covered a lot of the points in the second question. So taking into account this, the country ownership, the retention of capacities, we also have heard from countries in the process that even the modalities of capacity building are something that looking to move away from the fly-in, fly-out type of capacity building, which is, I think, related to your point. So taking all this into account and based on your experiences, trying to just, what would you do less of and more of in terms of enhancing capacity building to assist developing countries in mobilizing and accessing climate finance?
Well, maybe if I could pick something up, because we've spent a lot of time with a lot of international organizations and country governments trying to figure out the sort of keys to success in some small part. I mean, obviously there's tons and tons of important things. The most important thing, surprisingly enough, is making sure you set up the environment where champions can come forward. You always find national ownership is driven by champions, and they often, it's very good, it's really important to get high-level political mandates, so that's one thing that's critical, but it's absolutely essential to get a champion. And I want to say sort of two things. So we have one of our success stories is in Costa Rica, where we were working with the University of Costa Rica and the government of Costa Rica. We trained the University of Costa Rica up to be able to do long-term scenario analysis and some of the fiscal analysis and so on. They worked with the President's Office as well as the Department of Environment and Energy with the Inter-American Development Bank and mobilized $3.2 billion. The GCF funds actually were an important part of that. And there were two things there that were really important. The first was a kind of slow burn activity with the university. We had a champion in that university who did an amazing job. And then there was the hand-holding with government, building capacity, but just helping government connect the dots. Again, completely demand-driven being important. So we have an analogous thing that's happening now in Uganda where we've been working with an academic in Makerere University. He's an advisor to the president. They're now setting up their NDCs, their LTSs, and they're going to be going on this journey with the finance mobilization and so on. Completely demand-driven by country. So what we do in order to respond to that is then we have online courses that people can download. They're difficult to get through. 30, 40 hours, you get a certificate at the end of it. We then run schools which are completely open with competition, and you can do different tracks in these schools. We'll be holding one, for example, in Cape Town. We'll hold an annual one in Africa, Latin America, and the Asia Pacific. We will have 400 applicants. Each one of those applicants will have done maybe 40 or 50 hours of online studying. Each one of them will either have a letter from their Director General, if they're from government, or from a dean stating that this work will be involved in policy development, or it will be used in studies and so on for developing curricula and research. of the 400 analysts, we will only accept 100 analysts maximum. The demand is incredibly strong, but setting up this space where there's this competition and demand and so on, we unearth a large number of champions, and they sort of drive that forward. So we see ourselves creating an enabling environment, and then in country, a bit of an ecosystem. Go back to the universities. In Makerere, for example, the chap that we're talking about, we help him to publish papers. We provide support, coaching. I mean, he's great. He doesn't need help, but just make it easier. It's difficult in an African context. Article processing fees can be half of an annual salary just to get one paper out into open access journals and so on. But then that creates a sort of demand and supply in country autonomously. So I would go back to saying that demand is absolutely critical, and then creating entry points where people can help themselves, if you like, and then create levers that they can hold on to. I'm particularly excited, by the way, about connecting with the GCF, where what we'll do is that, suggest to countries that if they want to do this, they can go and do the whole shooting match in a whole of government approach by asking for readiness funds to help do that. And again, I think there's demand driven, and also it shouldn't be too easy. People have got to have skin in the game. Governments have got to commit analysts and so on. But at the same time, it shouldn't be difficult because it's impossible to get to the one person in the designated national authority, or the rules are complicated, or so on. I think that's maybe a bit of that's maybe the next phase that we're trying to impact with country platforms and other things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Ashala, please.
Thank you so much. For us, more learning. I mean, even for GCF as organization, I think we can do a lot more learning. We have 874 readiness projects in our current portfolio. That's a lot of projects. That was because we approved $1 million per year per country, and so that's been 10 years, so 874 projects, and it's a lot to manage. Lot to in terms of handling, and a lot of no-cost extensions, a lot of scope changes, etc., etc. So we need to learn from these 874 projects to really understand how can we do better, and also help countries to do better. Now we want to go, and we have actually moved beyond that 1 year planning for readiness and capacity building to help countries to think a bit more medium term in terms of planning. So 4 years, countries can ask for one readiness project for the 4-year period, using their $4 million for the general readiness support, and also really use it for strategic planning, as I mentioned before. That's the first thing. And we do now have a new department called Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning, new director, new department, so we are really focusing on impact and learning. The second thing I want to mention is what I mentioned before, really focus on national ownership, and we would like to do this through focusing on national organizations and helping them to be in the driving seat and bring the international organizations, universities and other organizations to really be at the back but support. So we have allocated $1 million per entity. All direct access entities can access up to $1 million for this four-year period from 2024 to 2027 to further strengthen their institutions to really be in that driving seat that I'm talking about. So more of this, and our project concentration with international entities is really high. I mentioned we have already committed $19 billion since 2015 to now. 80% of that funding goes through a handful of entities and international organizations. Only 20% of $19 billion go through national and regional entities. And we want to shift this. We want to change this to really help the national organizations to be in the driving seat and change this mindset of if you are national, you are small scale. If you are national, you are slow. No, actually we can change manage this. And that's where the capacity building and support to these organizations come in to really think at scale and speed. This is going to take some years, but we can get there. It's just bringing our international organizations, which we really value, but really to meaningfully help the local organizations to be in the driving seat. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chela. Lucas, your views.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. I'll start by answering what do we need less of, which I think is a hard question because we all work on this space. We don't like to criticize ourselves or each other, but I think what we need less of is on over-promising and under-delivering where private finance can and cannot come in to the picture. I think that there are key sectors where private finance is really well positioned to come in, especially with the right sort of instrument, blended finance de-risking, where they can make a significant impact on funding energy transition. And then we've seen there are sectors, whether that's a sector or a region that is too risky or does not bring enough returns, where private sector is very, very hesitant. And I think in this moment, where we're looking for private finance to come in and help close that finance gap, I think we're doing ourselves, everyone who's gathered here, a disservice by not doing a better job of differentiating between those two and owning where we need public finance to really come in to close that gap and where we can leverage private finance. What do we need more of? I think Mark and Ashala said it really well, but I'll just echo my own sentiments. I think we need coordination. So again, applauding the Green Climate Fund here on launching the Country Platform Hub a few days ago, which I think is going to be a phenomenal coordination for funding and executing across country platforms that are being set up. This is in coordination with the NDC Partnership, the V20, other very important groups. The Global Capacity Building Coalition is really happy to be on the steering group for this Country Platform Hub. We'll be contributing to this work stream in some sense by increasing the knowledge and the peer-to-peer sharing that's really critical in this space. So again, echoing comments from the GCF on the importance of learning here, will be both leveraging the network that GCBC has, which is 150 organizations, including all the UN agencies, the MDBs, et cetera, to make sure that we have the most relevant documents and information that can be shareable to countries as they work on setting up their own country platforms. And then two, helping to host some key South-South learning sessions where possible, helping to facilitate that exchange, because we know already that there are some examples, specifically here in Brazil. We have the Brazil Investment Platform, which has been appropriately so congratulated a lot during this week as a really good model for how these country platforms can work, and there's a lot to be learned if that peer-to-peer, south-to-south learning is successfully set up.
Thanks, Luca. I think in the last point, we from the UNFCCC process, we have been hearing a lot about what countries, that's one of the asks from countries, more peer-to-peer learning, the ability to learn from other countries. So thank you very much, and we're very happy from the UNFCCC to be part of the GCBC. We engage actively, and thanks for being so active in the capacity building hub since a couple of years. So let me here just pause a bit. I would like to hear from the audience, maybe one question or two, and then maybe one final question to our panelists. Anyone who would like to? Yes, maybe someone can help us with a microphone.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to the panelists for the insightful discussion. My name is Dr. Jude Samuelson. I'm from Nigeria. I work for a non-governmental organization. I have a concern about the global financial architecture that controls climate finance. The impacts are not there, and it's very obvious, and a lot of money has been spent on climate already. Last week, UNEP released the gap analysis reports, and there was a striking finding that greenhouse gas emissions have continued to rise with all the money being spent. So I'm wondering, even though it's difficult to say, can we assume that there is some level of corruption in the management of these funds? Because I'm from Nigeria, and if you ask me, I'll tell you, where are the funds? The people that are supposed to use these funds to implement some mitigation projects do not have necessary funds, and they are not there. So there's a problem with the way the funds are being managed. So I think there's need for your units. I'm happy you mentioned you have monitoring and evaluation and learning units. There is need to do proper monitoring and evaluation to find out what really happens, because a lot of money has been spent. And climate change is a global crisis. It's a matter of survival. For countries like Australia and New Zealand, the gradual increase in sea level rise is a threat. And so all hands have to be on deck to ensure that the funds work. And then to you, I'm happy to hear about your coalition. In Africa, there is need for dedicated capacity building. My organization, we provide some technical support to the oil industry to see how they can increase the pace at which they abate methane emissions. So I want to find out if you have members that can provide very good technical capacity building for methane emission abatement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question. I would like to see, how you see the role. Oh, my name is Nicholas Byron from Desjardins, which is a financial institution in Canada. But we work in more than 30 countries around the world, helping, doing capacity building with local financial institutions, actually. And we think local financial institutions can be part of the solution to help mainstream climate finance through the most vulnerable people, but they also need capacity building to do so. And if so, they would be able to manage those funds and help creating bankable projects that are really needed by local farmers, for example, or helping the energy transition. So how do you see the role of those local financial institutions, and maybe in regards of the GCF with the country platform, do you see any kind of partnership we can create?
Thank you very much for those questions. I think they're very relevant and reflect a lot of sentiments we heard before, so maybe I'll pass it over to who would like to address these questions. Ashala, please.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to try to address both the questions. On financing and impact, I was part of the Paris Agreement negotiations, and before that also I was part of the UNFCCC negotiating teams working with the least developed countries group. And I know the world has come a long way in terms of mobilizing funding, right? From our side, $19 billion as I mentioned, even though not sufficient in the context of trillions of money needed. From our side, when we allocate funding, they go through a very, very rigorous process. No organization can have access to funding without going through the independent technical advisory panel of the GCF board. And we also do, for readiness funding, financial management capacity assessment. So all that assessments are there, including independent evaluations. Is what you are talking about is the impact, right? The countries are still at the forefront, still suffering, and perhaps money is not going to where it matters. And this is where we are coming in and now saying, perhaps the countries also need to take the more ownership to say, actually strategically, this is how we would like to access this funding, or limited funding available for these priorities that we have identified. Until that happens, what happens is one organization comes in with a concept note or a project proposal without the government strategically thinking where the money should go to and submitting a proposal saying, by the way, we have an objection letter from the government. This is the project that needs to be funded. And that's why I'm saying we need to go back to that strategic thinking and whole government coordination to really think strategically, how do we leverage private sector for this small amount of money that's available? Where are the capacity gaps to bring local financial institutions, to bring local universities to really help countries to think a lot more strategically. Otherwise, this project by project approach is going to continue, and I think that's where the main gap is. The project by project approach needs to be stopped. In terms of local financial instruments, absolutely yes, we are actually encouraging local financial instruments to even to be accredited with the GCF. We are prioritizing countries with no single entity accredited in LDCs, Africa, AOCs, etc., and really bringing mainly the countries are requesting the national banks and private banks and other financial institutions to be accredited because they actually get the fiduciary aspects of the assessments that we have to do. Sometimes they lack the environmental and social safeguard side, so they need to put systems in place to meet. The GCF has very high requirements when it comes to environmental and social safeguards, the gender policy, the indigenous peoples policy, etc. But bringing the local financial institutions is one way forward, I think, because they get the finance aspect, they also get the private sector aspect. They need to think a bit more in terms of locally led climate action. That's where we see the gap. But bringing them on board is absolutely necessary. We are doing that through accreditation, but the country platforms is another, I think, a much more nationally oriented, whole society oriented approach that the local financial institutions need to be proactive on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Achela. I think that covers a lot of ground, and it's almost, you've covered the questions and maybe a bit of a closing statement, so thank you very much. Lucas and our Mark, anything you want to add?
Sure, I can come in briefly here. Just to the gentleman of Nigeria, in terms of the question on whether we would be able to collaborate, would happily, I'll grab you after this if there's a way that there's capacity building gaps that need to be addressed there, or whether your organization would like to be a member of the GCBC or some of our member orgs maybe can assist. Happy to have a conversation. In regards to local financial institutions, I would just echo the comments from the GCF. Of course, they need to be involved and should be. Our sister organization, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, has done a lot of work in terms of regional climate finance capacity for local financial institutions, running a number of programs to increase capacity gaps and address them, working with local FIs. When I was with USAID, we were similarly running programs working with local financial institutions. One of the things that comes up there, of course, like any capacity building programming, is that the needs on the ground vary from location to location, and so ground truthing what needs to happen, not just bringing in international frameworks and applying them. So I'll give the example. We worked in Colombia, where has a fairly advanced green finance sector. They have a green taxonomy, et cetera, but we, through deep conversations with the financial institutions that were there was a lack of a carbon accounting tool that had local emissions factors. So the emissions factors that were being used were regional or in some case global, and if we really want to help financial institutions decarbonize across their portfolios, we need more geographic specific data. And so we're able to work with the Banking Association, Asa Bancaria, and a number of other financial institutions in Colombia to develop this free and open source carbon accounting tool to help FIs close that technical capacity gap.
Thanks, Lucas. I don't know, Mark, if you want to add something, but maybe we're closing to the end. Maybe if you want to add something to this, but if I can ask the three of you very quickly, what do you think is the role of partnerships? I mean, you're working together already in accelerating, or actually, I think, making more effective the support for capacity building. So, Mark, can start with you?
Thank you very much. I'm going to go just to very, very clear examples because I I think they help us think this through. So, you know, I work at Imperial College. Imperial College runs something called the Energy Research Centre for the UK government. The UK government trusts Imperial College to develop some of these long-term scenarios and think about energy transition and so on. When we've been working in country, we find the same. So this is just one example, one type of example of many. But when we work in Costa Rica, for example, building up the local university with experts that the government could trust meant a whole lot more than having international experts come in. Sure, we were involved, but they knew that they had a local trusted partner that could drive things into the future. The energy modeling platform meeting, the school that I spoke about that's happening in Africa, that will be at the University of Cape Town. One of the key things there is seeing African universities being built up to go and empower other African universities to be able to run with us, as well as other African policymakers. UCT is responsible for doing the NDCs for South Africa at the moment. And you know, this is such an inspiring example, and as soon as people can see that they can do more, they will. Incidentally, the Africa School, the majority of the trainers are all Africans that have graduated from Africa as well. So we're able to tailor things for people's circumstance as opposed to something coming in from the outside. Something that we've tried to do though as well is to think about how we can break things up. So to go from data to the plan. So for example, the Turkish government now, they were releasing their NDCs and long-term scenarios. This came from the same body of knowledge that's been put together. And then from the plan to the deal. So I mentioned Uganda, this is where we're working at. And we're going to be engaging with others too. And we can modularize that, or we could do from data all of the way through to deal. Our standard way of operating, and suggest that this might be something valuable for others as well, is that we try and work over a 3-year period. Now it's a little longer than most, but it builds very deep roots. And as I say, it's a proven framework. It's mobilized billions of dollars. Normally in the first year, it's about doing a lot of hand-holding and working together and connecting the dots. The second year, and after that, people mobilize finance. There's often readiness and grant funding that can be used for the next round. After that, we move back and we work in a kind of a coaching fashion where locals are driving everything, including the universities as well as government. And in the third year, our effort is all about platforming, making sure that those folk are now in a space to go out and make impact and so on, because we think that that's perhaps the way to fundamentally make this sort of systemic change and make stuff really appropriate. It's very difficult. We have funds on the one hand that are capitalized in one setting, and we have people in country with very different experience. We're not going to be able to bridge it immediately, but if we can go on a journey together in partnership with international organizations in a way that we can work together, I think that's really powerful. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. For me, capacity building, there is this saying, capacity building iron out inequalities. And what is needed in the climate finance world and the climate action world to really make implementation meaningful is to really be on top of country ownership. And that this is my key message throughout, that's what I'm saying. So the whole UN system, I think we have to come together, the universities and other partners, to really change the business as usual now to put the countries in the driving seat. It's going to take a bit more time, but we can do it, and we do have resources. You can count on GCF, particularly the Readiness funding pot that we have, and please help countries to be in the driving seat. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be brief here and just say the question was around collaboration. We're really keen and eager to continue collaborating with GCF, with CCG, with the Capacity Building Hub, with UNFCCC, with all the great partners that we have here. And then just to close out with something that, again, my niece, 7 years old, wanted things to be simple. And a quote from Einstein is that if you can't explain it simply enough, you don't understand it well enough. And I think this is just the core message here on capacity building, that we need to make it fast, accessible, consistent, and make it easy for countries and make it demand-driven.
Thank you very much, Lucas, Charles, and Mark. I think we're reaching, unfortunately, the end of the conversation, but has been very rich conversation from our side at UNFCCC as serving as a secretariat to the PCCB. We also really look forward to continue working with you. The PCCB is one of these constituted bodies under the process and has the mandate to look at, identify what are the capacity gaps and needs in developing countries and ways to address them. I mean, we're not implementing it, but learning from you and creating this knowledge base of these are the gaps, this is how can be addressed through the partnerships and the good practices. And we have the PCCB network, of course, so looking forward to continue working with you. And thank you so much, and please join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much.